Jamie Fowler earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Biochemistry and Biology, magna cum laude, from Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota. She then worked for the Cryogenics Laboratory at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, as the technical and research specialist for solid tumors. During this time, she obtained a master's degree in tumor biology. In 2009, Jamie entered Lutheran Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. She graduated in 2012 with a Master's of Arts in Systematic Theology, summa cum laude. Very impressive. That fall, Jamie moved to Berkeley, California, to pursue a PhD in Systematic Theology at the GTU. Her focus in theology and science is on the relationship between both of sin and grace to our bodies and the physical world. Jamie is currently writing her dissertation. Next, she intends to teach systematic theology and continue her work in theology and science. Personally, Jamie leads a busy life as a mother, wife, and theologian, and she regularly teaches power yoga. Right. She and her family are involved in worship, fellowship, and ministry to the homeless in Berkeley. Jamie enjoys walks with her husband and their 2 dogs, visiting her family in Minnesota and Massachusetts, and time spent with her young teenage daughter. Please welcome Jamie Fowler.
Yeah.
Oh, do I need to close that? Okay.
Don't you get on it?
Sure.
There. So the last time that I presented at this conference, one of the first things I said was that I was making a joke about how Bob's computer didn't have a touch screen. Remember that? I completely made fun of him for it. It was a computer, because I was up here tapping on it like this and it wasn't working. It wasn't a touch screen. So look at this one. This is, quite the upgrade. This is really neat. So first of all, I want to start off with thanking and congratulating Adam. I've known him for a few years now. We did a little bit of work at the Apostolic Conference, and I am, like Adam, also a Lutheran theologian and biologist by training. So his work here is really personally exciting for me, and something that really I have a lot of similarity and pull to. So when I found out that Adam was the scholar, I was really excited about that. I believe his work is important because he's upfront and accurate in his vision of the planet's future and the responsibilities and roles that are coming up in this incredible paradigm shift from mechanism to systems, from parts to whole, from disciplinary isolation, now we're moving into an interdisciplinary collaboration. So he's paving a way for clear-headed, environmentally integrated action, action born of an understanding of our location, of our role as creatures embedded in the systems of this planet.
Give that a try and see what it is.
Yeah, okay. So this is a lot of what I just talked about. These are the contributions. So what I wanted to talk about and lift up from Adam's work are 3 components. And as I discuss them, I will say what I think is great about them as they stand on their own in the context of the whole argument that he's making, and also then to propose either a question to Adam or an idea for continued research. So the first is the first idea I want to talk about is the shift to holism. The second is the continuous planetary imago Dei. And finally, the planetary vocation. A shift to holism. This is something that we're seeing kind of discipline-wide in many disciplines now that we're moving into postmodern, post-human, post-astrobiology. That's different. So we're seeing this everywhere. It's like where, if you put your finger on the pulse of of the world, this is kind of where everybody's thought is. And that's a wonderful thing for theology and science. Rather than being so reductive and we kind of turn that around, it gives us a lot, as theologians, a lot more leverage into a discussion with science. They can't be so staunchly reductive anymore. So, Adam uses agential realism sort of as his way of describing using holism. So, Dr. Pryor has the argument for agential realism sort of underpinned by the shift to holism. So he doesn't claim a specific paradigm shift from maybe somebody like Fritjof Capra describes it in lots of his works, like Living System series. But Dr. Pryor is certainly building his arguments on that foundation. Most interestingly, this idea of agential realism and interaction of phenomena was something that was new to me, and I really appreciate it, and I find that I'm excited by the idea of things in phenomena, so that the relata don't pre-exist the relations. So as a biologist, I'm thinking of the interaction that an autopoietic system that dissipates its own energy has with its environment. Its cognition, its way of living, is always to perceive the environment and take in what it needs to survive. And that's already that's a coupled reaction already. So to give that reaction a philosophical name and out there in different ways, I find is already something that I felt was true. There's a truth about that, but I didn't have this language of these words. So I think this is something that can be applied in a lot of areas of biology, especially with theology. So what we get then out of this holism that's really important is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's an anti-reductive argument, that something new or novel happens at an increased level of, I don't want to say level, at like a higher dimension of complexity. So that newness is something that can't, it's not a part, it's actually a relationship among parts, so that when you boil things down to parts, you don't have it anymore. So then your parts can't adequately describe the whole that you were that you're trying to look at in the first place. So holism, it certainly can show us that there's danger or weakness in the system in that regard. So out of this idea, I have a research proposal that I think we could really make an argument for. It would be extremely tough, and this would be like the turnaround of a lifetime, but or maybe even science, period. So the scientific method is inherently reductive. The point of the scientific method is to look at one piece, one variable, and isolate that from other things to see how this one variable functions. So that you can't ever look at all the variables involved for an organism. And that, if you're looking to, now we're shifting into holism, and that means that science needs a way to study wholes. How? I have no idea. But it's definitely a need. It's something that, with the ideas of emergentism, holism that are coming out, and they're so big, we have to find ways to be able to study the whole, without which science is sort of refusing to acknowledge and validate the realness of certain things that don't have a part to point to. And unfortunately, our faith can fall into that category. So I think that this is a really strong critique that theology can push back on science with, that we need this other method. They're aware and know that holism's a real thing, but how do we study it? I think that, this just occurred to me, I think that an environmental scientist would probably have a much better grip on this idea than others, because they're working with like organisms and ecosystems, and this might seem more natural to them. Okay, and next move on to the Imago Dei. Adam's idea of the planetary Imago Dei, which has to move away from the individual. And this was like mind-blowing for me, Adam. It just really opened up my thought. I love this quote, as the Imago Dei, we refract the creative power of the divine in existence, bending and changing this power so that new ways of meaningful existence become available to creation. So from his astrobiological perspective, the Imago Dei is not a characteristic that individuals can possess. Rather, from an astrobiological context, we see that humans are embedded in living systems and can't be pulled apart out of that relationship. So that because we're so grounded to the habitable environment, and then the reality for human beings is that we have to live in together with our environment. Well, if that's what shifts the focus from the individual to the whole, is that you really can't pull out the individual from the environment, which is, it's a completely solid argument. And Adam also says we locate the Imago Dei in the wider account of cosmogony as the introduction of a new state of forming meaningful existence. This move is essential in the paradigm shift for the world that we're looking at. This holistic focus decenters the individual from the Imago Dei, which places a necessary emphasis on human embeddedness and dependence upon our wider world. The refractive and creative power of the Imago Dei is not disconnected from the planet, nor is that power active over against it. Dr. Pryor presents a refractive power that might be better described as one that is in, with, and under, because have to agree with me on how to do it, is in, with, and under our planetary living systems and habitable environment. So the resistance that we have that he points to individualizing the Imago Dei, especially in light of this refractive power that's coming through us as a whole, is, I think it's a wonderful addition to this theological symbol. However, the Imago Dei is still an experience of personal, by me as a person, is still an experience of agency. Whether by faith or by grace, that's another, not faith or grace, whether by grace or free will is another matter. That's entirely another argument that we don't need to get into here. But the fact is that I would still experience it as an agency. Even when limited by, because your environment will place lots of limitations on what you can do and who you are. Those are going to come from your environment. So you are limited in certain ways to what you could experience, what agencies you could possibly have available to you. But that's not to say that you won't experience that as agency, as choice. So I'm wondering for Adam, if the individual experience of agency as one's action/vocation in the context of the Imago Dei be connected to or continuous with the planetary Imago Dei. Can living systems, which are inevitably intertwined with the environment, still have that experience? And I'm wondering if we do, that is it possible for you to methodologically scale this separation from the individual to this communal experience? I'm wondering if that's something that you feel like you've already built in, or if it might be that you construct an ontological framework to move from individual agency to communal experience. Is that Karen? She calling for me?
I saw it, Paul.
Yeah, okay. Where'd my clicker go? Yeah. Yes. So these are the questions. This individual experience, individual action and creation, that you still experience that agency, you yourself, and can that be connected to a communal idea of the Imago Dei? How how does Adam envision moving from one of those to the other? And then planetary vocation. That's my third one. The third component that I want to discuss is vocation. Dr. Pryor establishes a planetary notion of vocation, a sense of what it means to live into the Imago Dei as a planetary phenomenon. He adopts the occupational definition of vocation, that is the work each person does in his or her own station in life. Station's the sum of the roles that we have in our lives. Adam listed off roles in his life. My bio listed off a lot of roles in my life. For instance, I'm daughter, sister, wife, mother, friend, Sunday school teacher, yoga instructor, doctoral candidate, and on. Perhaps planetary Imago Dei is a category that could be, suggesting this, that could be used as vocational categories. So we'll get to that and more to that in a second. But Dr. Pryor says a planetary notion of vocation would be to encapsulate the sense of station that serves the well-being of others by fostering God's loving kindness for creation in ways that are otherwise unimaginable. So I can think of two reasons that Dr. Pryor's definition and employment of vocation here is really important for our work in science and theology today. First, vocation calls for a holistic understanding. He's already asking for, by using, is it Karen Barad? Yeah, Karen Barad, her agential realism as things in phenomena. Now, Dr. Pryor can refer to holistic understanding of ourselves as life in earth, embedded in these living systems. So if we're life in earth, that vocation is tied to that then at the level of earth. So pastoral, and then also the other important component that I think is necessary when we talk about vocation is that vocation is largely a pastoral concept for us in our faith. When we talk about vocation, it's how do we live our lives? How do we live our Christian life of faith? What is, a lot of times you'll hear people say that they're the calling. Their vocatio is a calling. Nobody goes through seminary, and takes on all those student loans without that experience of it is a calling. You're giving your life to that. A vocation as such is constantly counseling us in these roles. If we're living out vocation in a way in which we're serving God's intentions, we're serving the well-being of others, and we're furthering God's love in the world, then we are constantly in counsel with the roles that we're actually playing. This is something that Dr. Pryor makes a good point about, and which I'm drawing on now. So vocation then, if it's a constant counselor in our roles, is always calling us to a keen awareness of the needs of living beings in the environment around us. So the pastoral aspect invites care for creation into our daily Christian lives. That's a value that I hold. That's extremely important. So pastoral quality and the need for self-understanding motivated by this work on vocation expresses an individual dimension to a life lived in vocation. As Dr. Pryor said, planetary vocation, the planetary level of that, must encapsulate a sense of station in the vocation of individuals. So the vocation of stand, I should say, is one. So the question that I can formulate here is if you want to encapsulate the station at the level of planetary vocation. So I'm hearing that from this level of planetary vocation to individual stations kind of underneath that. So you think of increasing complexity or increasing community from individual to community. I'm wondering if it could be the other way around, where you could identify planetary vocation as a role in your station. So that maybe creation care, I cannot think of a cute word for it, but that would be like mother, daughter, and it's on your list of roles that you could assume. And if not, then how, again, I wonder how you want to place that method-wise, or in your ontology. Uh, In conclusion, I think that's all I have for you. Let me see if I have anything that's, really important on the slide here. No. Nope. We're good. Look at this comic I found. This is a comic book. So anyway, that was fun. I was on Google Images today, and I'm like, what is this? In conclusion, the artful theological constructions demonstrated by Dr. Pryor are invaluable concepts for the relationship between Christian theology and the natural sciences. The shift to holism is foundational to our work moving forward, and Dr. Pryor also connects very real aspects of daily Christian life, like vocation, to our behavior in the wider world. Furthermore, the engagement of theological symbols in the astrobiological context is well done. It's a work that is hard-going and much needed. Dr. Pryor allows the two dimensions to meet without, this is how I like to evaluate it, this is where he did a great job. He allows science to meet with theology in realness, and he didn't give up ground on either front. So he didn't collapse on his science and have weak science, and he didn't give away on your theology and water it down, which is, it's hard to do. Personally, it's hard to do. Resulting in a coherent presentation of our Christian faith and our lives in the world as we understand ourselves today. So thank you, Adam. I really enjoyed your paper.
Sure. So I mean, Jamie, thank you for reading the paper so carefully.
I did.
Because you write these things and you sort of go, I have no idea if anybody's actually going to understand what is happening here.
Right.
And it's really gratifying to sort of see that played out in some different frames. So again, there were at least sort of two, three, 2.5 pieces as you were talking that were coming up from me. So I think the move to talking about this as in, with, under is brilliant and not what I had intended. And I feel like a bad Lutheran for saying that. I should have assumed that was the framework that was there, but I truly didn't, right? And I think one of the things that would be interesting to do from this would be to do some work with practical theology. What does it look like to try and develop a set of symbols and liturgical language that fits particularly for the sacramental description of these theological concepts? Right? If I'm going to sort of be honest about the fact that nobody's going to use this language in a church community, right? What then would it look like to try and put this into a language that could be used in a more everyday fashion? And to me, right, the sort of sacramental reference that's implicit in with and under makes a lot of sense as a place to do that. And then you are, to my mind, sort of the back half of the presentation, right, is this critique, which is a good one, that you still feel these things as individuals, right? And I 100% agree. So when I joked that I wouldn't tell you about the last 70 pages, the last 70 pages are about what is it that you do with this as an individual. So for me, I frame this in terms of three, what I would call phenomenological movements. Presence, wonder, and play are the ways that individuals are then able to live out this concept itself. That was too much for sort of one day. But I think what's interesting, right, is that I hadn't, my effort here to sort of frame this in language of vocation was new. So I hadn't tried that before, and I think you make an interesting point and a critique that I need to address in terms of this notion of vocatio, which is actually absent from the description that I've offered. Right, I sort of jumped immediately to the German concepts of Ludwig and Schahn without doing vocatio first. And that notion of what being called out means in light of the sort of occupational structure from Luther that I've told is really, really important. I'll have to sit and think about what that would mean in terms of this way that you framed what I would call a dialectical movement between the planetary and the individual. But I think it's certainly, I mean, I'll really look forward to sort of like sitting down, meeting with responses to get a better sense of what that might look like. And to be fair, right, holistically, the place where it makes sense to do that is in a practical theology working on sacraments. I hope someone who's much better with words than I am would do that. that would be great. I would love for a practical theology student who would go after that. That would be a lot of fun. Yeah, no, thank you. That's really great.
Okay, we're going to take a break in a minute so you can move your cars and just relax. But I can take 2 questions that are short questions, not long statements. So who has a short question, please?
Hi, I'm Joy Barnett. I have a doctorate in molecular biology. I've been a practicing scientist and program manager in product development for over 30 years. I also hold an MDiv from PSR. So I'm very intrigued by this concept, especially since I thought I invented the term astrobiology when I was in high school. With that disclaimer, I want to introduce the concept that may or may not be familiar to this particular group, which is that science frequently, facing a complex problem, dealing with things like scaling up in biotechnology, uses an approach called statistical experimental design to screen for the most important variables, address those, and then continue to process and improve. So I think that is an approach that needs to be considered as a way of approaching holism and interdependencies. And as a practicing program manager who is now consulting as a bivocational person, what I have found is that this is very apparent in the biotech industries as they confront the interrelatedness of human clinical responses to any permutation intended to heal or offer symptomatic relief, and understand the possibility and the risks for off-target pharmacology is the typical answer. So something having a side effect that turns out to be very bad. So I would encourage you to think of how, in a practical theological sense, the scientists who are coming from all faith traditions and have only certain familiarity can think in terms of wholeness and responses, because that's a place where I think regulations are lagging the research.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great question? Yes.
Yeah, Jamie, you said that science is inherently reductionistic. That's true. Essentially, science wants to describe as much as possible with as few assumptions as possible. And so the goal of unification in science is essentially addressing that question. Now, science uses mathematics to do its modeling. So my own understanding is that the classification of finite simple groups is the piece of mathematics which does the most with the fewest axioms. There's only 6 axioms involved. And so one needs to start from there, accepting that you have to do some logic first in order to be able to find your terms.
Thank you. Responses?
I think that just highlights the reductiveness of the science for it. Like, and what we would even have to turn around is that we started from logic, we started from math. And can we use, my husband took this class in math that was math from a really complex level that was dealing with holes. And I'll have to ask him what it was, but it almost killed him. And it was just brilliant. I didn't know that was a thing.
There's certainly like an underlying piece of the work that I do that moves toward emergent wholes. I started that when I was doing my dissertation work, and it's just stuck. But I think what's really interesting, and I think really important in both of the insights, is that the language in which we describe how holism is important shifts depending on who the audience is in the discussion, right? So in a theological framework, I like sort of vocation. In a more philosophical framework, I like something like agential realism. If I'm speaking with a group of scientists, right, I'm going to need a different set of terms, right? And that's very helpful, right? I'll be honest, I just wasn't sure how many astrobiologists would really read my book, but I felt a lot more confident about other philosophers and theologians reading it, probably who were going to need more help with the astrobiology than before. philosophy and biology side. So it's framed in that sort of direction. It would be interesting to develop a project in the opposite direction though and say, all right, now that we have these sort of pieces worked out, what's the language game that we would play within various, particularly statistical, the work in statistics that's being done, particularly in advanced biotech work, that could be used in order to reframe this, which would be a much more amenable, that's the presentation I would want to give if I were doing this at like Georgia Tech's astrobiology Institute.